I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old's Oscar Countdown, the final one for the 2022 Oscars, the 6th season of Old's Oscar Countdown. And what a wild award show and award season this was. We've been talking about the Oscars now for 6 months, and it's been a wild ride trying to predict what will win. Ultimately, we went 19 for 23, and in this episode, I will talk about my reactions to the telecast, just my opinions on the host and the sort of controversies and whatnot, and then, of course, ultimately the winners and how this will have an ultimate effect on the Oscars and the future of movies going forward. But before we jump into that, I do want to mention that this channel does not go away. I know a lot of people are big fans of the Oscar content. However, for the past 5 years now, I've been continually uploading videos, and after the Oscars, I sort of transitioned this channel into more of a film analysis sort of an arc. And starting next week, without a break, we will be talking about the films of Paul Newman in a new series I like to call Movie Star Magic. So the first episode is Paul Newman, then we're going to talk about Sigourney Weaver, and essentially it'll be a new series that I'm going to be doing where I'm going to break down an actor's career, talk about their movies, their defining roles, what makes them interesting, and sort of give a little bit of context, because for a lot of people, Will Smith winning his first Oscar was a big thing that he really wanted for really 20 years. He's been trying now, and he finally got that. So, Will Smith is not an episode, but could be, just in terms of tracking his career arc and trying to understand more about what makes him so defining as a movie star, that sort of magic that they have. So there's going to be a bunch of different actors, and we're going to do that all the way until the next Oscar season. At least that's the plan as of right now. So jumping into things, let's talk about the telecast before we talk about sort of the actual results. The big sort of, I think, thing that this Oscars will be remembered for is that Will Smith's slap sucker punch kind of call out against Chris Rock. When it was happening in the moment, I thought, this is a sort of a weird sort of tension-filled bit, right? The fact that they cut it off and he was sort of saying these slurs. I thought that it was, not, real. It was just sort of the actors acting. But then to sort of find out that happened live in front of everyone, and that there was, sort of a half-hearted kind of weird apology from Will Smith, and a strange thing. I mean, I think one of the craziest things, truthfully, to ever happen at the Oscars, the fact that someone came up onto the stage, slapped one of the presenters, and then started calling them out and yelling at them and swearing at them from back in their seat. It's a crazy thing to happen, particularly when Will Smith, of course, eventually wins that Best Actor Oscar. There is going to be that sort of tainted element to it. And I do think that a lot of people 20 years from now are going to think Chris Rock was the host of this award show, just because that will be sort of the iconic moment of the night. And then in terms of the hosts, I thought they had a really terrific opening sort of monologue and a little bit of bits. I always appreciate the monologue, and I missed it definitely last year. And I think the past couple of years without a host have been a mistake, and I do think after seeing that this year, that the hosts really do give the show a good bit of structure, do give sort of a face to the award show. That I can think of the Billy Crystal award shows with Seth MacFarlane or Jimmy Kimmel's La La Land Moonlight year. There is a little bit of a face to it. But here's the problem. While this award show generally was very traditional, it was sort of nice to get back to it, versus last year, which was very chaotic, and they tried a lot of things that didn't work. But this year it's a very traditional award show. But that being said, there's still sort of things that they did and decisions that they make that I didn't really appreciate for how traditional it was. For example, the big one being that the awards for a lot of the technical categories, 8 categories, were cut and truncated and sort of edited and really shortened. And ultimately, after watching the award show, my initial reaction was, for what? We have the sort of opening monologue, which is tight and rehearsed and is always usually pretty well done, which I think that the 3 women did. But then there's a couple bits that you have in there, like when the eyes of Tammy Faye, and one of Sykes as Richard Williams. It was mildly amusing, or Regina Hall sort of the COVID list. There's certain things like that where they were okay. They weren't sort of laugh out loud, but sort of maybe went on a little bit too long, maybe didn't land as much. And then ultimately you're watching this thing, you're watching Regina Hall sort of hit on these men, and you sort of go, I know this is supposed to be funny and it's a TV show, but can't we have 30 more seconds for Joe Walker to talk about his editing process in Dune. Some of the technical categories were sort of truncated and edited for what ultimately? The show was still 3.5 hours plus, and what was sort of the substitution? And the substitution was having the presenters, talk a little bit longer, having the sort of bits, having these sort of fan-voted montages, which I think were a mistake right from the beginning, and then seeing a movie like Minyamata, which I don't even think has a U.S. release, get shown, or the cheer-worthy moments, these weird sort of odd things where I had friends of mine that were asking and questioning and going, wait, were these movies nominated? What is this? What's happening? Real confusion, which I think sort of destroyed the structure of the show. So overall, I think the hosts did sort of a good enough job in terms of bringing that structure to the show, and I really did appreciate their sort of opening monologue. I thought that was funny, but like many other award shows, a lot of the bits didn't necessarily resonate with me, and sort of went to track and went astray, and then ultimately you start questioning to yourself, well, why were these included? And sort of that, of course, in just a definite challenge that the Oscars have versus ABC, who wants to make a good award show, who wants to make a good television program. And the Oscars want to, of course, celebrate these people. That's their main focus. So there's a little bit of a clash there, even within movie fans and the casuals, that the balance is difficult to strike. And with certain things, was this the worst Oscars ever? No, I don't think so. I think it was more traditional than even I expected. However, I think the big factor is the fact that, a lot of these categories, particularly the technical categories, were edited down to save really no time and to add time to songs that weren't even nominated and fan-worthy moments. And it was definitely, I think, a mistake in that regard, to sort of sacrifice a lot of the technical awards for not really anything of substance. And then now transitioning more into the results of the show, there weren't really a lot of surprises, which I was kind of shocked by. I mean, there are some people I saw on Gold Derby already that got 23 out of 23, which I don't think has ever happened maybe in the history of the site, or maybe it's happened only a couple times. Even myself, I got 19 out of 23, but if you just picked the front runners, you could have gotten 21 out of 23, no problem. Even in the short categories, relatively easily predictable. Now I always tried to go for those surprises. I mean, we've had many years of surprises, so I tried to predict, maybe a Licorice Pizza or The Dress, or something out of left field. But this year was actually very sort of boring in that sense. So good for, I guess, for predictors, but ultimately kind of boring in the sense that we didn't see a Penelope Cruz big surprise, or an Anthony Hopkins, or even a Her original song winner. Even in the shorts, we had sort of the two big ones, and The Queen of Basketball and The Long Goodbye winning. And I think Windshield Wiper was sort of the number 2 for animated short, so that winning there wasn't necessarily a huge surprise. As I predicted in a certain respect that Dune did very well in the technical categories, winning 6 Oscars. So there's a clear support for that movie, and if the sequel sort of is of the same quality, I think that could be a big sort of Lord of the Rings style sweep. And then of course the Best Picture winner, CODA. This is such a fascinating development in the Oscars, because for the past 20 years we've had this stat that if you get nominated for Best Editing, or if you don't get nominated for Best Editing rather, you have a very low likelihood of winning for Best Picture, that there's a sort of a correlation between the two. However, this year, CODA didn't have that. CODA had 3 nominations and won all 3, and it was an interesting sort of development, a unique year. I wouldn't necessarily throw away that editing stat, but it is telling the fact that by the time the nominations came out and by the time the actual Oscars were announced, there had been sort of a change in momentum, a shift in an appreciation for a movie like CODA. And the fact that Power of the Dog was the clear frontrunner and had 12 nominations, and yet pulled off a Mike Nichols style Graduate, only winning Jane Campion for Best Director and nothing else, which was a fascinating development. And then a movie like CODA, which, when we're thinking about its legacy, I do think it's going to be sort of in 2 parts. One part being that this is the first streaming movie to win for Best Picture, and it sort of defiled Netflix. Netflix has been trying year after year, putting so much money into trying to win the Best Picture Oscar. And now I think we're at the point where there's a clear sort of Netflix bias of some sorts, or the type of movies that they'd like to reward, maybe a little bit less crowd-pleasing in terms of the ones that they're trying to promote. It's a fascinating sort of dichotomy that Netflix has been trying so hard, and then Apple, in their first sort of attempt, wins it here for being the first streaming movie. I think so. I think in terms of CODA's legacy, that will be a big one, sort of dethroning Netflix there, and maybe sort of signaling that Netflix, who knows, will they even keep on making these kinds of movies? I don't even know at this point. Will they really be trying to focus on Best Picture until they get it, and then when will they stop if they ever do? It'll be fascinating development to see. So that's one part, but I think the other part of CODA in terms of its Best Picture legacy will just be the fact that this is not necessarily the best picture, I think, of the year in terms of the sort of capital F filmmaking cinematic achievement of the year. I think for a lot of people, CODA is a nice, heartwarming, effective movie, but it is a little bit generic. It is a little bit sort of manipulative in certain respects, and I do think, unfortunately, that maybe fall into a book of like a Green Book or a King's Speech, which are sort of recognized as, charming, nice movies, but lose out in terms of over time of the general appreciation, just because they're not necessarily these huge advancements in the cinematic form or the most respected movies necessarily. And it'll be interesting to see the sort of legacy of CODA. But the fact that this was a movie that I was sort of debating whether or not would get nominated to it winning Best Picture and winning all of the nominations, it got a fascinating development, and just another telling sign to the fact that even though Oscar nominations happen and we think there's going to be something clear, Power of the Dog, right, something that can come along and really start to sweep things. So I hope you predicted CODA like I did and sort of got along on that sweep. And then in terms of my just favorite personal win, I was glad that Dune won for film editing. That was one I was sort of pretty confident in, yet despite a lot of people going otherwise and going for King Richard, but to me, Dune seemed like the clear winner. I tried to go for certain things, risking it, but I did think that Dune was sort of clear winner there, and I felt confident there. So I am also glad that Joe Walker won, because I'm a fan of him as an editor, and I think Dune is a really well-edited film. So that was my favorite win. And then maybe a personal disappointment I want to mention is just Licorice Pizza not winning for original screenplay. It seemed like Paul Thomas Harrison had it in the bag, and then when he lost WGA, there was serious doubt in that regard, in terms of Belfast won Critics' Choice, and then Paul Thomas Harrison didn't even win at WGA. There was clearly sort of a threat to a movie like Licorice Pizza. I still went with it because it seemed like the most Best Picture type of a winner, and let's not forget Licorice Pizza was nominated for Best Editing when the way Belfast was not. But ultimately, Kenneth Branagh won for his writing screenplay, and Paul Thomas Anderson has yet, despite being nominated 11 times, he is yet to win an Oscar. Crazy to think, but true. Maybe his next movie, or maybe he's one of those going to be those directors that never wins. But that was sort of a disappointment, just because even though I wasn't the biggest Licorice Pizza fan, I do want to see Paul give a speech and ultimately try to get an Oscar. He is one of those guys that has made masterpieces, so the fact that he doesn't have an Oscar is insane. But ultimately, the most important award show is not the Oscars, it's the Connors. Those are my personal picks, my favorite sort of top 10 movies of the year and Best Director. So if you want to hear my thoughts on some of these categories in terms of my actual personal winners, there's not a lot of overlap. We can talk about movies like Come On, and Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar, and The Card Counter, and really terrific movies that weren't mentioned here at the Oscars. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on the telecast down below. Overall, I thought it was a little bit more traditional than I expected, so I kind of appreciate that, just to go a little bit back to traditional. But then, of course, the ugliness of the edited categories and the fan voted moments sort of took up the time. So I question, whether or not that was engaging or not. It'll be interesting to see the numbers come in the next couple of days. They come in to see how many people actually watched the show, and if it was an uptick or not, that will be telling. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on the telecast and the winners and how well you did, and if you tried to predict upsets or not, all that kind of stuff. I'd love to hear. Please stay tuned. Please stay tuned to next week. Movie Star Magic, a brand new series. I'd love for you to check out the first episode or the first couple episodes to see if you're interested in it, and to understand sort of an actor's career arc from sort of a little bit of a film analysis and a film historical perspective. That's what this channel is all about. In terms of one part, it's the analysis of the race. In this case, it's the analysis of the films that make up, of course, the race that we always talk about at the end of the year with the Oscars. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. And until next time, stay tuned.